Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from around the world. It's Chuck Dixon, your host for Ask Chuck Dixon, quite aptly, where you get to ask me what I do for a living, or what I ask me about what I do for a living, which is I write comic books. And if you could hit that subscribe button, very much appreciated. You are helping the channel grow, and that's all I'm going to say about that. First question, Dwayne Thomas, Two Gun Dwayne Thomas. Has it ever struck you how many plot lines in mainstream Marvel continuity seem to have been cribbed from old issues of What If, and what that says about later writers' creativity or lack thereof? Just looking at the original 1977-1984 series, I see What If Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four, the Hulk had Bruce Banner's brain, Jane Foster became Thor, Conan walked the earth today, Doctor Doom became a hero, the Hulk became a barbarian, Spider-Man's clone lived, Elektra lived, the Beast and the Thing continued to mutate, Sharon Carter had not died. Well, this is another instance where I'm learning from you. I never thought of this. I don't know that anybody has ever thought of this. As in a previous episode where one of you brilliantly suggested an absolutely jaw-droppingly amazing idea for an intercompany crossover, this one also it's a mind blower. You're right. Somebody just, what are we going to do next month? Just went back through the long boxes. It had never occurred to me, and I read all of these. It had never occurred to me, even that, boy, this seems familiar. But it does seem like they went down the whole list of what if comics. And of course, every story should be a what if story, but these are specifically what if stories, or as they would call them in DC Comics, imaginary tales, till they came up with Elseworlds, which sounds a lot cooler. But yeah, I mean, you nailed it, my friend. They're busted. Muttman. Question 1. Have you ever written an all ages comic or a story written for younger readers? If so, was it an enjoyable creative experience? Before I got into comics, I wrote children's books. Not my first choice. Comics were always my first choice, but I somehow backed into a short career writing children's books, mainstream books. I wrote 2 Winnie the Pooh word books, which went on to become huge bestsellers. They were advertised in TV Guide, so they were big. Of course, I saw no royalties because, as far as the world knew, they were written and drawn by Walt Disney himself. So, but it was a terrific experience, and writing for kids is tough. That's what I learned. Writing for kids is tough. You can't fool kids. You can't just write, some clever stuff or some arch humor. No, they want a story. What comes next? What happens next? Keep me entertained. And it's not because of short attention span. I don't think children have a short attention span. If you were ever a kid lying on the sidewalk watching ants for hours, you didn't have a short attention span. But you had a long attention span for things you were interested in. And that's the job of working and writing and creating for kids, is to draw them in. And keep them there, hold their attention. And it's a lot easier to hold an adult's attention because, let's face it, when we're watching a TV series or a movie or whatever that doesn't particularly engage us, we just let our minds wander, start thinking about, the mortgage payments or that car we saw that we might want to buy if we ever won the lottery. And we sort of drift away, and then we re-engage with the movie once it draws our attention again. Kids aren't like that. Kids don't do that. They are fully into whatever it is they are watching, and they demand that entertainment meet them halfway. That's why kids are a tough audience, but a great learning ground. I mean, in addition to Winnie the Pooh, I wrote a little golden book called Raggedy and Andy Go Flying. It is written under my pseudonym, Mary Fulton. It's my grandmother on my grandmother on the Dixon side, maiden name, because they told me that no man could write Raggedy Ann and Andy, even though Raggedy Ann and Andy were created by a man. And while at DC Comics, because I had experience in children's books, they contacted me or offered me a chance to write a Batman animated series based children's book, mainstream children's book. And so I did this, The Joker's Apprentice. And I applied all the lessons I had learned in writing for kids and kept that story moving, kept the interest going. Uh, and, kids' books, I didn't enjoy my time in kids' books because there was a lot of pressure. They don't pay very well. And somebody explained to me that the reason they don't pay well is because every elementary school teacher in America thinks they can write a children's book. So if you don't want the job, somebody else will take it. They just have to reach into their slush pile and make a couple of phone calls, and they can replace you in a heartbeat. Um, Something that's a little tougher in comics because the talent pool for comic writing, as we've learned in the recent years, is pretty damn shallow. Now, as far as writing for children generally, I've written SpongeBob. I wrote quite a bit of SpongeBob comics. I've written Scooby Doo, and generally, when I was writing Comics Code approved comics, um, I wrote them with an imaginary precocious 10-year-old in mind. So even when I was writing Batman and Robin and Moon Knight and things like that, I was writing for children in my mind, but trying to make the work double layered. SpongeBob is a great example. SpongeBob has an obviously immediate appeal for kids. The stories are great. The stories are always engaging. They always draw the kids in. As I say, they meet the kids halfway. They reward them for their attention. But there's this other layer to SpongeBob that you can enjoy as an adult, and the stories are generally very very funny, very funny stories, uh, and universally funny, not just jokey joke, but humor growing out of character. Some really spectacularly goofy situations that they get these characters in, and the whole premise of SpongeBob is insane. Um, it makes no sense, and that's the fun of it, and um, that's why it's a great kids property because kids feel that most adults don't understand SpongeBob unless you've had kids and sit and watch it with them, and then you're like, oh, I get it. You don't get it, but kids get it, because when I first saw SpongeBob, I thought what a stupid idea. Why would kids want to watch this? And then when I watched, I realized it's because it is a stupid idea, and it leans into being a stupid idea, and the kids get it, and they understand it because kids are hip, and they made this character their own. A whole generation of children made SpongeBob. This is their cartoon character, and you know that's why kids are such a tough audience. So I don't envy anybody who has to write for children. And as we see in recent years, they are failing miserably over and over again to find things that kids want to watch. Twin spin for the Mutt Man. All right. Question 2. Do you agree with critics that superhero content has exhausted the audience? They're saying the Marvels movie will suffer from audience fatigue and therefore is proof that superhero movies are less profitable. Some would suggest this is why Marvel and DC has declined in sales. Yeah, every cycle has an end. Every cycle has an end. Westerns had a long run. The spy movies had a run of maybe 3 or 4 years. Horror movies seem to be the only genre. Now, the interest in horror movies goes up and down, but it's pretty level. If you put out a good horror movie, people aren't going to be going, the last one stunk. Now, if you put out a good one, they'll give it a chance. So horror movies, I think, is the sturdiest genre around, even though Hollywood was really late to discover them. They're always profitable. They're always big earners, but somehow Hollywood was like, we really don't like those kind of movies. Well, Hollywood's in such a bad shape now because all the movies are failing, not just the superhero movies, that there are more horror movies in production currently than ever in the history of cinema. Every studio has a slate of horror movies because they earn money. They don't cost as much money to make unless you are an idiot and you sign a $400 million deal for 3 Exorcist movies that tanked at the box office. That's a good example. The Exorcist. I know I'm off on a tangent, but it's my show. those Exorcist movies made no sense. $400 million deal with the producers to create 3 Exorcist movies. Nobody's been able to do an Exorcist sequel that earned money or has been well regarded. And once again, they've proven that it's true. Now, if they wanted to make 3 Exorcist sequels budgeted at $20 million apiece, would have made all the sense in the world. And I'm sure today, Universal is agreeing with me that, wow, we should have kept these budgets low. Then we would have actually earned some money. So people would, if they hadn't spent all this money on those Exorcist movies, everybody wouldn't be laughing at them now for the box office they had. If they had kept the budgets at the level of, say, a Saw movie, they'd all look like geniuses today. And why couldn't you make an Exorcist movie for the budget level of a Saw movie? Why did it cost so much? Where does this money go? And that's a lot of the problem here, is the superhero cycle could have kept going, but they kind of priced themselves out, where every single one of these superhero movies had to be a blockbuster, had to earn $1.5 billion to get itself out of the hole, to recoup its negative costs and actually, make a profit. And I think the last superhero movies that did this were the last Spider-Man movie and the last Batman movie. And that's where we are. I think the cycle is over, except for Batman and Spider-Man and possibly Superman. If the next Superman movie is any good or responds to the audience's expectations in any way, Superman can join this exclusive club of superhero movies that survived the superhero glut, the collapse of the superhero cycle, much the way James Bond survived the spy cycle. They still make James Bond movies; they're still profitable because he stood the test of time. So, and consequently, he's the one who started the cycle, much like Batman and Spider-Man and Superman started the superhero cycle. So they're going to stick around because audiences are invested in them, until they mess up, until they make, a movie so bad like Batman and Robin that kills the franchise. But the cycle's over. It's over and it ain't coming back, no matter what they do. And studios are scrambling because they've got stuff in the pipeline that they know no one wants. And this new Captain America movie pushed back. A bunch of other superhero movies pushed back on the schedule, going in for reshoots, which is just more money. And at what point do these studios realize this is good money after bad? We're never going to recoup the money we're pouring into reshoots and rescheduling and recasting and all these other things. So yeah, I think the cycle is over. Sad because it didn't have to be. If they kept producing quality material that people actually wanted to see, if they'd gone back again and again and again to the well of source material instead of thinking they knew better, the cycle could have gone on another 10 years. Green Adrenaline 6405, the great Jack Kirby, said that comics will break your heart, kid. Did they ever break your heart? And if so, how? They may have disappointed me a few times, but it didn't break my heart. That was Hollywood. Early on in my comic book career, when I just thought everything was wonderful, and I understood going into comics that I had a window. When I was reading comics, I thought, well, Neil Adams is always going to be super popular. Well, it wasn't true. Neil Adams had a window. As a comic book creator, I thought if I could get 5 years, 5-year window where I was, selling a lot of books, I'd be happy because that would establish a continued comic career. I would never have as good a 5 years as that again, but that would be fine with me as long as I continued to work in comics. I established my bona fides. And in the early 90s, I had what I called my Elvis year, just money I could never have imagined pouring in. People paying me to do what I love to do. Just amazing. And I think I had about a 10-year, 12-year window of high popularity, which was more than I ever expected, more than I could have ever wished for, and did guarantee me continued, employment. I mean, I've written comics steady for almost 40 years now. So early on, comics weren't breaking my heart. I was super enthusiastic. I was working from at the time I ran into Hollywood. I was working for Marvel on a regular basis. I was working for Apple Comics and Eclipse and Now and New and any other company that showed up. I was doing work for Semic, the company in Sweden. So I was prolific, turning out a lot of stuff, having a great time. And along comes Hollywood with an interest in producing a movie based on Alias, the Now comic that Todd Fox and Enrique Villagrán and I worked on until Now stopped paying us. And this thing got as close to getting made as you can get without being made. I mean, I imagine people who actually completed a feature and then have it shelved forever, that's got to be a killer. But this one was as close as a comic book guy could hope to get, in that it was cast Nicolas Cage, Gene Hackman, screenplay by Academy Award winner, well, soon to be Academy Award winner Frank Darabont, directed by Joe Dante, directed The Howling and Gremlins. This is going to be his first like non-genre, straight up thriller movie, crime thriller movie, and it was Universal. Locations were shot. It was 2 months away from principal photography beginning, which is when the real money rolls in. And Universal decided that Nicolas Cage could not carry a feature. This is early 90s. This is before he won an Academy Award, I believe. And they just dumped the whole project. They just, it went away forever. And it didn't break my heart because I wasn't going to make that much money off it because I didn't own it. I was hoping to see some money. I was hoping to get some recognition. So naive. But what it did make me do is turn my heart to stone as far as Hollywood was concerned. I was already anticipating, I'd already turned my heart to stone as far as comics were concerned, because I knew, like I said, the window would end, they would eventually disappoint me. But I turned my heart to stone, and I became, as one producer said, the guy famous for saying no. I would call and I would get offers for options. I would get offers to write screenplays, and I would say no, because the money was never enough. The money was never, at the time, I was maybe writing 5 or 6 monthlies and getting royalties off of books that were selling well. And Hollywood would never exceed that amount of money. I mean, if I was to write a screenplay, it would take months out of my comic book writing schedule. And they weren't offering me even scale because they thought, it's a comic book guy. He'll work for peanuts. He'll be so excited to be in the movie business that he'll do anything. He'll work for nothing. He'll dance to our tune. Well, I wasn't interested in that. Comics were my thing. I didn't get into comics to become a screenwriter. I got into comics to write comics. And movies, cool. I like movies. I like movie money even better. But they were never offering enough to make it worth my while, enough to, jump into it. Now, Frank Darabont, when I talked to him on the phone during Alias, he said, you should come out to Hollywood, because he liked my writing. Later, he would do the screenplay for Way of the Rat. Awesome screenplay. But he said, you should come out here. You'd fit in. You could get work. Blah 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 blah. Well, I had a young family, and I was happy. I was happy what I was doing. I didn't want that Hollywood rat race. I already knew it would be bad. It would be bad for me, bad for my psyche. So I didn't do it. And I'm so glad I didn't, because so many comic book guys I know who ran out there, it wasn't a good experience for them. It ended up, breaking up families, things like that. It's just not a good experience. It's an ugly place. It seriously is an ugly place. And I'm glad I made that decision not to go out. And years and years later, I was speaking to Ed Gorman, who's a prolific crime and Western novelist. And I told him the story, and he said, "You made the right decision." He said, "Because I went out there, and so many guys I know went out there, and they had initial success, and then they spent 5 years generally trying to replicate that initial success, and it never happened for them. And they left there, broke and broken." So I'm glad I didn't do it. I mean, not that it was ever a choice. I never really even thought about it seriously, but I'm glad I didn't do it. And so in that way, yeah, nobody really broke my heart, but I definitely hardened my heart. Um, so the Hollywood thing taught me that. So I was prepared when comics turned their back on me for a while, and I had to find new venues. I was in the wilderness for a while after leaving CrossGen, but I had good friends in the business, and they reached out and gave me work. And I rewarded them by doing good work. Thank you, Bongo Comics. Thank you, Marv Wolfman, who I will mention later in this video. Thank you to a whole bunch of people, Tom DeFalco, people who reached out and gave me paying work for a while, so I could feed the family, pay the mortgage. There are good people in comics, is what I'm saying, but the comic industry as a whole it's a tough business. David Jordan, I noticed that you did Hunter Ninja Bear for Phenom Comics, and Scott McDaniel did Star Riders for them. Are there any talks for you two to work together on a project for them? It seems like a sure hit if you two are on the same book again. Hey, Star Riders by Tony Bedard, awesome comic book writer. How often do I say that? And Scott McDaniel is worth your time and effort. It's from Phenom. Phenom produces only quality stuff. And you should check out Star Riders by Tony Bedard and Scott McDaniel. Hey, I'd work with Scott in a heartbeat. Mr. McDaniel, awesome talent, and we got along great. We had a lot of the same sensibilities, a lot of the same approach to comic book creating. And if comic book fans are telling me the truth, my run on Nightwing with Mr. McDaniel might be the best thing I ever worked on. I'm not gonna. I've worked on a lot of great stuff. I'm not gonna place anything number one, but certainly Nightwing close to my heart. I really enjoyed the time on it. I really enjoyed working with him and seeing what he would do each month. And boy, Mr. McDaniel is a serious comic book creator. He is a workhorse. Not serious about himself. He's a fun guy. One of the funniest guys I've ever met. Great guy to hang out with, but serious about his craft and serious about entertaining readers, which is what I am all about. So, Andrew Venables, you've mentioned a couple of times you like the Stallone Judge Dredd movie. I've not seen it in a while, and I'm not above giving the movie another watch. Would you make the case for giving this movie a reappraisal? Yeah, I mean, I haven't made it a secret that I love Judge Dredd. I've read Judge Dredd from the very beginning. It's one of my favorite comics. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I thought that Stallone was a good fit. Yeah, I don't like that he took the helmet off, but it's Sylvester Stallone. They weren't going to make him Sylvester Stallone movie where Sylvester Stallone doesn't show his face. But I've told this before, but I told Alan Grant, we were standing, we all just had, the whole back crew had just had dinner, and we were standing afterwards talking, and Alan asked me what I thought of the Stallone Dredd, and I said I liked it, and he actually reached out a hand and shoved me. his reaction was so visceral. And then he apologized. And he said, "I can't believe it. You're such a fan of Dredd." And I said, "Well, that's why I liked it. It had, particularly as a fanboy, it had so many elements. I mean, Mega City 1 was incredible. Even more incredible because of the limitations of 1990 special effects, the use of miniatures and all the rest of that. It just looked so cool. And there were so many of the great characters, Judge Hershey, and it had the Long Walk, it had the Cursed Earth, it had Mean Streak, it had those crazy brothers whose names I can't remember, and it had all these great elements. And because Sly is such a big comics fan, I mean, he got into playing the role. And I know people were annoyed by Rob Schneider as Fergie, but Fergie was in the stories in the comics, and I think that Rob he played him the way he appeared in the comics. I thought the humor worked. I thought the action worked. I thought it was just a whole lot of fun. Its biggest downfall was that it didn't get a PG rating, or PG-13 rating. Uh, the R rating, I think, really hurt it at the box office because this is a movie that dads would have taken the kids to see. Um, and I've explained this before. That the movie's a little grim. It's a little scary in parts, but I think what really gave it the R rating was the clone sequence at the end, which they could have gotten away with if they didn't have so much goo. There's too much goo. I mean, look at the Mummy movies. There's all kinds of reanimated corpses and stuff like that. It still gets a PG-13. Judge Dredd gets the R rating because it was too much viscera in the clone sequences, and I really think that's the key. Because if you put too many bodily fluids in the movie, the ratings board goes, this is pretty disgusting. We're going to give this an R. But yeah, overall, I like it. Now, I like the Carl Urban one as well. I watch the Stallone Dread like once a year. I think I watch the Urban one 6 times a year. I mean, I'm always putting that one in because it's just such a straight up, unapologetic, pure action film. To be fair, I put Urban's Dread movie in as often as I put in the 4th Rambo movie. Because to me, both of them they scratch that same itch of just a pure action film. Scott Schaefer. I was going through back issues and found a comic by publisher Graphic India, and inside was an advertisement for Black Tiger by you and Graham Nolan. Was that ever released, and how was it doing work for that company? Yeah, Black Tiger was released. It was released here in the United States as well as in India. Graphics India reached out to me and Graham and asked if we wanted to work on this character. They designed and created the character and gave us the situations. And it was a lot of fun. Those guys were great to work for. They paid a good page rate. And you can still find these somewhere. I'm sure you can go on eBay and find these somewhere. I don't know if it was ever collected into a trade. I'm going to have to contact them and ask them if that ever happened. I would like to have a trade of this even if it was in Hindi. But we did other work for them, Graham and I did other stuff on my own for them. Graham and I did a series that was never published. It was to be tied in with a movie property that never came to be. It was called Astra the Invincible. And to this day, Graham and I put it up there with our Bane work as some of the best comics we ever did. It's a alien invasion. Think Jack Kirby's Thor. And that's what it is. I think it was a 54-page graphic novel. And we had so much fun working on it. And it didn't see the light of day because the movie deal fell through. Now, Graham and I are reaching out to the publishers in India to see if we can make some alterations to the artwork because it was drawn with a specific Bollywood actor in mind, and we would have to change that likeness. And that's really all we would have to change to make it publishable. And we're trying to reach out to Graphic India to see if we can at least do it in a digital format because it's an unpublished Chuck Dixon, Graham Nolan sci-fi action adventure. And it really is wild. It really is crazy. And we really dug working on it. Now, one of the things working for a company in India, I realized they were going to be published in the United States, but I also thought, well, these are going to have an audience in India as well. I need to learn what Indian audiences expect from their entertainment. I mean, how are their storytelling sensibilities different from ours? And so one of the happy results of working for Graphics India is that I watched dozens and dozens and dozens of Bollywood movies, including Bollywood superhero movies, which you need to check out. They are a blast. So I watched a lot of Bollywood movies and learned a lot about what the largest movie audience in the world expects from its entertainment. And there were significant differences. There were similarities to Hollywood films and a lot of differences. And I had to learn them. Also learn more about the culture. I remember writing kids playing soccer because I thought everybody in the world outside the United States loved soccer. And the editor called me and said, we're really not that into soccer. We're more into cricket, which came as a total surprise to me. But I learned from watching the Bollywood movies what to avoid. The Indian stereotypes that we think of that are not accepted as cultural elements by people who live in India themselves. And so I remember where Graham, I did not write this, Graham drew a cow in the background, just like on a city street. And it caused a bit of a furor. And they called me, and I'm like, look, I didn't write that in. I knew the sacred cow thing was, a stereotype. But Graham threw it in. So I'm throwing Graham under the bus. He didn't know. He didn't know. He didn't talk to them as much as I did. He didn't delve into the research as much as I did. But it teaches him to follow my scripts more closely. Mr. Nolan, you must follow my scripts religiously, without question. But it was a fun experience, and now I'm going to get a million questions about Astra the Invincible, and I hope to be able to answer them soon. So, but look for it. I'm sure it's on eBay. I'm going to look on eBay after I'm done with this, see if there are any copies out there. Scott Schaefer, what happened to the Airboy Revival that was supposed to have occurred through the publisher? It's alive. I assume they took the money from Indiegogo and went out of business. The only thing I had gotten from them was a PDF of Airboy 51, but nothing from number 52. That's kind of a dark side to crowdfunding comics. That's why I don't participate anymore. Well, the sad thing is that the founder and one-man band that ran It's Alive, unfortunately, unexpectedly passed away. He's a young man. He came as quite a shock. And he passed away in basically at the very end of the production of Airboy 52. Now, Airboy 52 is completed. And some of his friends were getting together in an effort to have it see publication. So where that stands right now, I have no idea, because I wasn't that involved in the. This isn't to say it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I just simply wasn't that involved in the day-to-day doings at It's Alive. I mean, Drew contacted me and said, "Do you want to do some stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, cool." And we did it, but I wasn't that involved in the day-to-day, so I don't know currently what's going on with fulfilling that crowdfunder. But I do know the work was completed. I mean, I certainly would like to have some copies of Airboy 52 for my own edification. But it certainly will appear somewhere. His friends were putting everything together. It's tough, because it was like a one-man thing, and it was a matter of like finding everything. Like, where did he have this? How far along in the process was this? And all the rest of it. But I assure you, it will eventually be straightened out. And yeah, it is the problem with crowdfunding, which is why more and more, almost exclusively, I'm going with crowdfunding people who don't even pitch the stuff until everything is complete. I mean, we're near complete. So Richard Meyer and Compass Comics with Graham and Eric, they've all proven that they deliver. They'll deliver the product when they say they'll deliver it. And with Eric, it's all done ahead of time. It's all completed, everything. Man, it's hard to keep a secret. Work on something for months and months and months and not be able to tell anybody about it. But Eric doesn't put it out there, offer it until it's done. I mean, Alphacore 1 will be fulfilling in just a few weeks, but all the copies are in the warehouse now. I saw them. It's a mountain of freaking cases. Jason Shepard. I once read an essay by Denny O'Neil where he said that after he'd written a character, he couldn't read that character anymore. Like anyone else's take on that character is wrong. Have you ever felt anything like that? Is it difficult for you to read someone else's version of Batman? Yeah, I've brought this up in last week's video that it's tough. It's hard to see what someone else is doing with something that you've invested so much of your imagination and effort and everything else into, and to see them get it wrong. I can't even imagine. Denny must have been, plugging his ears half the time, going la 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 la, so he didn't have to hear about some of the horrible things. And they did the Batman, including incontinent Batman, and things like the Killing Joke, which I know he wasn't a big fan of. So, yeah, I mean, I think every comic creator feels that way, where especially if you worked on a character for an extended period of time and had something to do with their continuing legacy. It's hard to look and see what someone else has done. This subject will come up again in this video. Dan Brannon. I recently read 100 Ninja Bear and I appreciated all the realistic frontier colloquialisms and homespun vernacular among the hunters. But did you have a hard time committing to the use of a more formal English with the Japanese characters? I imagine such a decision could easily lead to paralysis by analysis. Do you have a protocol at such crossroads? Just flip a coin or what? Yeah, I mean, when I'm writing Japanese characters, I mean, I don't speak Japanese. I don't understand nuances. I don't know, are there puns in Japanese? What form, I mean, how does that language work? I don't know. I don't know. All I know is from what I've read in the subtitles in samurai movies, quite literally. But the thing about Japan is that especially in this period, the late medieval, going into the Tokugawa period, and even to today, Japan is a very formalized society. It's very stylized. Style is a component to the Japanese culture in a way it isn't to any other culture ever. I always say it's almost as if Japan was art directed. Their culture was art directed by somebody. There's, I mean, just the fact that there's a tea ceremony. I mean, things like that, and these formalized traditions and things like that. But you have to think that they would have the same thing in their language. That there would be formal ways of addressing people, and you would address people at different stations of life in a different way. And that's really all I kept in my mind. And also not to make it too stilted, to make it sound like something someone actually say, rather than, aping Shakespeare. Although Shakespeare's not a bad guy, because, we think of Shakespeare as stilted because of the way that actors often present Shakespeare. But if you read the language, and if it's ever actually properly acted, it's pretty rowdy, and it's pretty informal for the most part. And he uses phrasing and words, often words he made up, because there weren't. I mean, he's helping to create the literary language of English. So he's failing to find words he needs, so he has to make them up. All that's to say that, I kind of kept that in mind. The characters speak formally, and there's protocols, but not to make it boring. So that's kind of the fine line you got to work there. Jeff Moss, as much as you dislike Johnny Quest, I'd love to hear your take on it. What are your thoughts on Space Ghost and Hercules? I dug the idea of Space Ghost when I was a kid. I mean, it's Batman in space. What's not to like? I just found the stories never went anywhere. It was always, the latest alien threat on some barren alien landscape, and they always just landing on a planet. I mean, I don't recall them like fighting, through black holes, or battling near supernovas, or leaping from asteroid to asteroid in an asteroid belt. But once again, it was Hanna-Barbera, and I'm sure the writers proposed interesting things for Space Ghost and Jan and Jace to do, but they're probably rejected as, kids, what do they know? It's Batman in space, that's enough, blah, blah, blah. Guy's got a deep voice, fires rays, and the aliens all speak weird. So there was no growth. There was no attempt to make the universe deeper. So while I like the look of Space Ghost, everything about the look of it is awesome. There's not a lot there. I love to tackle this property and add some dimension and add some real suspense and challenge and everything else. I mean, as a testament to how much I like Space Ghost, we all have that first Funko Pop we buy. Where you go, Funko Pop, that's stupid. I've never, whoa, wait, Space Ghost. Yeah, I want that one. And and then of course you buy 2 dozen more. But Space Ghost was my first. So that's how a testament to how much I like the character is that I bought a Funko Pop, and also I occasionally get to hang out with George Lowe, so which just deepens my love for Space Ghost because I get to talk to Space Ghost himself. The Hercules I don't remember so much. It's what was it, kind of a prehistoric Conan-esque. If Conan had a family, I don't remember a lot. I remember watching it. I remember liking them. I remember the big rock critter particularly, um, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. So I can't help you there. Uh, but but as far as my approach on Johnny Quest, I would have to think about it, and it would have to be paid. Have to be paid to think about Johnny Quest. But I'm sure, much as I turned Scooby Doo around in my mind and made Scooby Doo make sense for me, I'm sure I could make Johnny Quest make sense for me. At Zuffin 1864. What do you think of more comics coming out on matte paper? I feel like a lot of artists make work that would look better on matte, but almost everything is glossy. It can be thicker than newsprint still. I just don't think everything needs to be glossy. I absolutely agree with you, especially if you're reading it under fluorescent lighting. A lot of times you're like shifting and turning the book so you can actually see it. I love what Taschen is doing. Taschen is collecting. I hope DC goes for this at some point. Taschen is reproducing these massive, these huge hardcover reprints of some of the earliest, most influential Marvel titles, and they're bigger than omnibuses, and they're printing them on matte paper, uh, which was attractive to me. I thought this is cool. I mean, it's on a high quality, thick matte paper, but it feels like comic book paper. It doesn't. It's not the cheap pulp paper comics are printed on, but it feels like it. And as you see here, there's no sheen. You can see the pages perfectly. You can also see the size of these books. They're enormous. And it was kind of neat because it gave me a feel the omnibuses never give me. It took me back. It took me back to the drugstore. It took me back to on the living room couch, reading Avengers #3 for the first time. So yeah, I wish more comics were done on matte paper. There's a guy doing crowdfunding, and he's printing on matte. And I'd really like to. I can't remember his name, and I'm sorry about it. I'm getting terrible at names as I get older. But there's a guy doing crowdfunding, and a really cool guy. I've met him on a bunch of podcasts. I think it's brilliant because he's able to keep his price point down, and the comics look great. And of course, matte paper today is better than the matte paper back then. I mean, you can get all kinds of varieties of matte paper that are far superior to the crappy newsprint that comics used to be printed on. And I do think they pop more, which is counterintuitive. You think, oh, glossy is always better. No, it's not. It's not always better. And I'd love to see I'd like to see Joe Frankenstein brought out on a series of matte comic book papers. Reprinted as a classic comic book, just for the fun of it. Remember fun? Okay, Kane Dorr. How close did you work with Marv back in the day, and or ever? Also, what were your thoughts on the Teen Titans, Tales of Teen Titans, during the Wolfman Perez era? Well, Marv is a guy. I mean, I ran into him in the final days at Eclipse. Eclipse hired him on to do a big crossover event of all the company's superhero characters, and they brought Marv in because he was one of the comic book kings at the time. His name would sell books. He had this great imprimatur, and all of us at Eclipse understood why they were bringing this guy in. We were trying to get the attention of the mainstream comic book readers to draw them to our Eclipse comic book universe. And I liked Marv. I liked talking to him. Obviously hugely successful writer at the time. Far more successful than I had been up to that point. So I always like to talk to him, like to listen, and figured I might learn things. My favorite of his work will always be Tomb of Dracula. Just a terrific comic. I read it religiously. Couldn't wait each month for the issues to come out. Him and Gene Colan were such a perfect marriage, and it was a successful Comics Code horror comic. It was suspenseful at times. It was funny at times. You could tell he was digging it. Marv was really into it, and I think that was. I think that will always stand, and he might even agree with me. I think it will always stand as his best work. Teen Titans, I wasn't that into. I read a lot of them. I think I followed the book for a couple of years, but it just wasn't my kind of stuff. Um, it's hard to describe. It's the kind of comics I would never write, and I had no interest in reading um, because of the approach. And I can't put my finger on it. John Byrne comics sometimes get to this level of I don't know, fan service, cuteness. I don't know what it is, but it just didn't appeal to me. I continued reading X-Men for a few more years in this period, but I dropped Teen Titans pretty early on. But hey, it was hugely successful. I mean, it had an audience. Just I wasn't that audience. Another thing on Marv and something Mr. Wolfman and something I touched on earlier was about not reading properties after you leave them. Um, I believe it was San Diego, and I was sitting at the DC booth, and I'm signing Nightwing, and I'm there for like an hour, and they sit Marv Wolfman next to me. Well, after like the third stack of Nightwings and the third fan gushing praise all over me for Nightwing, I finally turned to Marv and I said, I feel like a creep. I really do. You created this persona of Dick Grayson. I would not be writing Nightwing if it were not for you. And I feel odd sitting here. And Marv got this big smile on his face and said, I'm so glad you said that. Basically, I was addressing the elephant in the room because I didn't want any tension between us. And I said, it must feel terrible for you to watch someone else getting praise for your creation. And he goes, yeah, it's not a good feeling. He says, but I'm glad you said something. Basically saying, I'm glad you're aware that you're a creep. No, it was. I'm glad you're aware of that. This is an uncomfortable situation that you addressed it, rather than just sitting there saying nothing with the two of us with this tension between us, which I didn't want. I like Marv, and obviously I like his writing. I don't like all his writing, but nobody likes all of anybody's writing. But when Marv is on, I don't think there's anybody better. Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. If you want to beard me in my lair, you want to draw me from my cave, if you have questions, suggestions, whatever, pictures of dogs and kitties, throw them my way at brunobookstore@gmail.com, the most reliable way of reaching me. And while I have you, the pre-mentioned Alphacore #1 is still out there. You can still get it through January. There's all kinds of, there's 4 different covers. I think the CGCs are all sold by now. And there's, tchotchkes, and we've got goals to reach about animation, about announcing Joe Bennett and my next project for the Ripperverse. But if you don't know what Alphacore is, it's superhero cop thriller. The members of Alphacore are the public servants and public figures who patrol the skies and the streets of Florispark, the fictitious Texas town that is the core of the Ripperverse. And I had a blast doing it. And as you can see, Joe Bennett gave it all to this project. A tremendous artist. One of those rare artists who delivers the eye candy as well as being an awesome storyteller. And he and I plan on working together on the Ripperverse for a while because we really dig collaborating. We're having a great time, and I think you will too. So check it out at the Ripperverse. I will provide the link below, and I think it's worth your time. And as I said earlier, it's the first of many projects. I've already written 2 more projects for Ripperverse, and we'll be writing a 4th before the year is over. And these are graphic albums. These aren't just pamphlet comics. These are all 100 pages plus. And it's good reading. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, and all the other wonderful things you do. And thanks once again for the incredible questions that make this show what it is. It's not my answers, it's your questions. And I will see all of you down the road.